Nerds? Tom here, talking to you all about Blazon, hope I'm pronouncing that right, seeking funding on Kickstarter. And now, of course, since this is a prototype, I have to give the disclaimer that, not everything is final and things could change. But as with most prototypes I've gotten recently, this one actually looks pretty dang great. So that disclaimer might not even be like 100% necessary, you know what I mean? So this is a very puzzly, semi-abstract game. I'd like to relate it mostly to games like Azul or Sagrada, where it isn't a full abstract. I mean, there is theme in this game. You are sort of decorating your shield, and it's kind of the same thing. Like in Sagrada, you're making a stained glass window, right? So of course there is theme there. You're definitely doing something, but the puzzly nature of it is probably the area where I'd compare it more so. So like I said, you're going to be decorating your shield, and you do this by drawing cards from either of two different decks, and the decks each have like a little bit of a market, and you actually can manipulate that market a little bit too. And there's tons of different symbols on the card. Like I said, there's two different decks, but there's also different types or elements in the corner of the card. The cards have points value, which are also kind of like their cost in a way. They have a little symbol that shows you where you can place them on your shield, and they have something called an augmentation, which is like a majority control endgame points thing going on. So in order to play a card from your hand onto your shield, you actually have to burn other cards with point costs equal to or greater than the card that you're playing on your shield. So if this card costs 4 points, right? I mean, it will give you 4 points, but it also, you have to burn 4 points of other cards. You have to burn a 3 and a 1 or 2 2s, or you could burn a 3 and a 2, and you're just, paying a little extra for it to get the card to go where it needs to go. And there are, of course, a bunch of rows and columns on your shield, and the card does tell you where it can go, but also each row, each space really, has sort of like a top and bottom. If you put it on the top, it's different. If you put it on the bottom of like that same space, like whatever is showing, whatever little rim is showing on the top of the card or on the bottom, is how you're setting that entire row. So if I place a card such that it's covering up the bottom symbol and only the top symbol is showing, well then the other two cards in that row have to be in the same orientation, which means that I could potentially be looking at cards that, like, the card tells me I can place it there, but because of how I placed my cards previously, I actually really can't. Or I can. There's this token that is somewhat advanced play, but I would always play with it. That kind of looks like a Nickelodeon splash token, but that can allow you to break the rules, so to speak. You place it on the card, and then you get to play the card even if it's not really supposed to go there. It's -8 points if you do that, but you can always actually revert that by playing a card over another card that you've previously played. Not only is that good to do, because then you're going to get that Nickelodeon splash token back, right? You're going to not incur the 8-point penalty, and you got the points for the first card you played. You're going to get the points for the second card you played. But what's also good is that there are tons of these goal cards. I think they're called distinction cards in this, but they're goals cards. They're the first person to do X, Y, and Z will get extra points. Second person will get fewer and fewer. And that's kind of something you've seen in games, but there's tons of different decks. You always take one from the A deck, one from the B deck, one from the C deck. And a lot of these really seem to be like Venn diagrams, where like you feel like, if I put this card here, this card there, and that card there, especially because there's multiple symbols on the cards, you'll feel like, I could actually complete this goal and this goal. A couple other things I'll mention is that there's a pretty big delineation between the end game points and like the mid game points. So you'll be scoring points during the game whenever you play cards. The points that are on the card, which is, like I said, also kind of like the cost. When you play it onto your shield, you'll immediately gain the points and score them. But whenever you hit certain milestones, it's like multiples of 10, you'll get these big ass tokens, and those will score you extra points at the end of the game, but everybody else will get these smaller tokens. They're called Herald tokens, and those are points at the end of the game if players don't use them, but you can also spend them on your turn to do extra actions that are pretty strong. So like you can reduce the cost of a card when you play it, you can just straight up take an extra card, you can wipe the row. It's pretty sweet, and like, obviously you want to be scoring points. You want to be playing the big cards. If I'm going to play these 3 cards to reach this goal, all 3 of those cards, I'd rather them be worth higher points than be worth 1 point each, right? But if you barrel forward a little bit too fast, you might be giving your opponent some benefit. But then again, once you're the first person to fill up your board, that's one of the endgame triggers, but also if you're the first person to hit 50 points, that's also another endgame trigger. And then when all of the those distinction awards, those gold cards in the middle, when those are full up, then that triggers the end of the game as well. well. And I wouldn't say that this is a low scoring game, but like 50 points isn't super high. I mean, you do still have a lot of, that's just the mid-game scoring points, right? Then you still have all of the end game stuff, but I mean, you're never going to have like a score of like 300. So it does mean that things like that 8-point penalty or a couple extra points per card that you play is nothing to sneeze at. And even like the 1 point that you would get for keeping the Herald token and not using it, sometimes those points can really matter. So this is kind of point salad-y, and not point salad in the way that like everything you do gets you points, but there are tons of different ways to get you points, and you actually kind of want to do all of them. You don't really want to ignore anything. You don't want to just play all the big cards and then ignore the mid-game goals, because again, if you can score a lot of those, which you could probably score every single one depending on how they come out, or you could score most of them, you know. And then of course I forgot to mention the augmentation symbols on the cards. Whoever has the most in each of those symbols will get endgame scoring points too. So that's yet another thing to be thinking about here. And again, it really does come down to like an Azul or a Sagrada, where the rules aren't really all that hard to explain. Like, granted, I don't want you to ever take any of our Neverboard Gaming videos as a how to play, except for the actual how to play videos we have. But if you've watched this video, you probably know the basics of how it works. But the strategy comes into all of the different symbols on the card, which ones you're going to burn to be able to play it, which goals you're going to complete, which goals you're going to be able to complete first before the other players. Is it worth it to use that Nickelodeon token? I mean, I know it's not. I'm holding the rulebook in my hand right now. I know it's not called the Nickelodeon token, but I'm going to call it that. So yeah, overall, I definitely recommend this game for fans of Azul or Sagrada, or, you know, games like that. It's a bit intro plus-y. Like, it could be used as an intro game, but it has a lot of brain burnery elements, and again, that Venn diagram of all the gold cards and things like that, that it's maybe shouldn't be baby's first game, but, you know, intro plus. It's a step 2 type of game. I'm going to put a link to the Kickstarter campaign in the description box down below. Go ahead and grab your copy while you can. Also down there is going to be a link for Game Toppers, they're the sponsor for Neverboard Gaming. And also down there is going to be a button that says subscribe. If you're someone who watches the end of Neverboard Gaming videos, you know what I'm going to say. Except 90% of you have already clicked away. Subscribe and you'll never be bored. But boom!